Okay, can you all hear me? Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to see so many people here today, and I know there's a number of people online as well, so thank you for giving us the time to come along. When I was looking through my notes last night, I realised it was almost 5 years ago where I stood in here, 5 years next month, when I stood in here, gave a presentation on places of refuge, and I was asked if the future was bright, you know, after that. So little did I know at that time that 5 years later, I'd be standing here, you know, talking about concern over delays in the provision of salvage services in dealing with casualties. I think Nick has kindly summed up, you know, the background to it. I think which you're all familiar with. Was growing concern that there were delays occurring, but we were looking to gather some evidence on that side to see if that was the case, and again, if it was, and if I can just find the clicker. Nothing happens. Okay, there we go. Okay, and if it was really, you know, to engage with industry, if it was the case, to gather the information as such, and if corroborated, you know, to look whether there's a link between that. I mean, LOF has been mentioned, but obviously there are a number of different contracts of that. So really to see if there was an underlying, you know, cause there regarding the type of contract that was being used. And again, depending on the outcome, to look to identify any potential solutions to eliminate or minimise any further, you know, delays on that side. The project board will just put it up there of that. Obviously, Ben Harris from Ship Owners, Steve Roberts from London P&I Club, and Andreas Ogre from Skald of that. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank them, A, for engaging me, you know, in the first place to carry out the work, and they've been very supportive in helping, you know, work with me through this. But I'd just like to add at this stage that they have, you know, I can say with hand in heart of that, allowed it to be completely independent without any interference, you know, from their side whatsoever. I'm going to run through very briefly. You know, some of you have seen some of these slides before, but just as a brief refresher, just taking a look at the responses we got back in and look at some of the stats that came back in before I'll get into some of the detail. So the questionnaire in the end went out to just over 300 stakeholders. There was requests for extensions. I spoke at Salvage and Rec Conference in London last December, and there were some requests following that if I could extend it. So we extended the period until the end of January, you know, on that side, and we ended up with 120 completed response forms. Now, in addition to that, I attempted to do a number of one-to-one discussions with a number of stakeholders. For personal reasons, I didn't manage to get through them all, so apologies if there are some people in here that were expecting to sit down and have dialogue with me. I think we just managed just over 40, you know, on that side, which gave me a lot more information or supporting information on that side. But I can assure everyone that I remember counting up the figures, you know, at one time, and I think with the number of questions and potential responses, I think there were about 3,000 or 4,000 different parts of information that came back in from all those that were requested. And they're still piled up in my sitting room, and my wife keeps asking me when I'm going to get rid of it on that side. So on the stat side, it ended up from the insurance sector about 28% of the responses. It started off, there was a bias towards P&I clubs, but thanks for some people in here going out and spreading the word, we managed to get a bit more engagement on the hull and machinery side, and it almost ended up, you know, towards a 50-50 split on that side. From legal entities, 16%, SCRs, 16%, salvers, 9%, technical consultants, you know, working down the line without going through it all. But what I did try and do is go out and be as widespread as I could, and it was a global response. I know there are people in here as far as field from Australia, but we had responses from Australia, New Zealand, you know, and Japan, China. So it was very inclusive from that point of view. So the main questions asking about delays. Overwhelmingly, people felt delays do occur in contracting the salvage services, and obviously there was supporting information that came from that. Again, overwhelmingly, people felt that these delays, if it hadn't done so already, could cause significant damage, loss, or danger, to life. So a lot of concerns about potential damage to the environment or life itself. A lot of people said they'd personally, been involved with incidents where there are delays. Of course, I realise there are a number of incidents that are handled perfectly, in textbook responses without any delays, whatsoever. I equally, with a number of incidents I handled previously, know there were a number of occasions where there were delays, and it actually took formal directions from the state, to underwriters or other parties to tell them if they weren't going to contract services, then it would be done on their behalf and at their expense. So I think it cuts both ways, but obviously there was a number of people that with their involvement, they hadn't seen any delays itself, but the figures were very much the other way of that. And it was felt that with time, because some people were saying in the early days it wasn't as bad as it had been in the past or that, but by the time we worked through everything, it was felt that, yes, delays are there, and certainly the feeling was, with the evidence that came in, that it was getting worse. So what did people feel were the main contributors to the delays? Well, financial considerations maybe shouldn't come as a surprise to many people, but that was, came out top of the list. And again, 80-odd% either thought it, between them, was either important or a very significant contributor. And again, evidence, bore that out as we started getting other detailed, facts coming in. The next two, uncertainty regarding the choice of the most appropriate contract type or the appropriate action, to take. I can understand that to a certain degree. Quite often you're faced with an incident where it's the early days, you've been asked to make a decision, information is limited, extremely scant on that side, and you're having to commit yourself to doing something, because generally doing nothing isn't the best option. Certainly options are likely to become fewer, with time. So I can understand that, and that perhaps takes us back later on in the presentation towards education or awareness and what we can perhaps, things we might be able to look at it on that side. And obviously, into the legal side, again, 64%, together on that side biased that, felt it was very, very important or very significant contributor. Salvage contract considerations. People pitched in, looking at the bias, pollution and threat to the environment, which is nice to see. Their cost implications, not far behind again. Looking at the likelihood of a wreck situation. Now, you can be cynical and look at that from the point of view people are. You could say from one point of view, people are looking at worst case scenario, what might evolve, and that might point them in the direction of one type of contract. I could say perhaps the biggest concern from, depending who the party was and where they stood, is the cost implications if it got that far. True safety and welfare, quite surprisingly in my mind, it came in lower than I would have expected. I mean, probably when I started the soft rep job back in 2008, a lot of talk at that time about criminalisation of seafarers, etc. And I'd have been surprised at that time if true safety and welfare were not top of the list. So it shows you how things have perhaps changed. And again, that's perhaps borne out later on in the presentation when you're looking at the role of the master and whether he is or is not involved in decision making. Then we see a heavy bias of a lot more decisions being taken ashore and at times not taking their requirements into consideration. Looking at, again, types of contract, pre-award, post-award contract, and again, heavy bias towards LOF, type contracts, on that side. People certainly saw the benefits, of that. Time saving, again, biased, towards a, post-award contract. Experience was a bit more split on this, whether people do, at this early stage, consider the worst case scenario, or whether they're simply just focused on what is happening at that time without what might be around the corner, on that side. So there's a bit of work to be done there. Again, I asked a question about, civil or criminal liability, whether they felt that came into it, and again, a bit more biased towards people perhaps being a bit more unaware than they should be regarding that. But people, coming to the bottom one, again, people felt that there was a big difference. Without something like a Lloyds, LOF or that, there was a big difference regarding the speed of response. Right, agreement with LOF statements. Again, as I would expect, everyone felt it was the best known post-service reward contract form. But it was equally felt, although people said quite openly it was the best form, people put many descriptors in about how good it was, people still felt there is still a clear need for a lot more education on the form and on the benefits, on that side. And we'll come back to that. Obviously, we know it's been used less than it was previously of that. And there were question marks, and there was a bit of division, although it was less clear here. When I asked the questions elsewhere about, having more transparency and openness over awards, or settlements, to see, because there are loads of perceptions out there. People are working on perceptions than perhaps having the full information, at the time of that. But it was felt at this stage of that perhaps more information, available might help decision-making, going forward. Was felt LOF was in danger, of disappearing. I mean, as I was about to put out the review, I already had LOF-related questions within the questionnaire outside, and obviously we had the announcement from Lloyds that they were considering making changes, to the arbitration brands, and ultimately that may well have had a knock-on to LOF itself or that. But we decided just to continue and still to gather that information, whether it, and look at it, whether it be useful to Lloyds or not, with their own review as well of that. Was felt there was a danger, of Lloyds LOF disappearing unless changes were made. I mean, we may see minor fluctuations up and down, but it was felt the overall trend may well continue unless we were a bit more proactive or a lot more proactive, on that side. And again, people's view was that LOF awards were generally over-generous. Oh, have I missed one? Right, sorry, catch up with myself now. Gone one too far, my apologies. Okay, agreement with LOF statements. I asked the question, is LOF always considered? I think a lot of people come back and say, yes, I actually think it's considered all the time, but I think a lot of people dismiss it then extremely quickly after they've given it some thought. There was some feedback come in from some underwriters that they do consider it, but they also had directions, not, whatever the circumstances, to go for an LOF form, and they were fearful of repercussions if that was the case, on that side of that. Does it bring additional expense? The perception is it does, on that side. Is it in need of renewal, reformulation? Again, bit of a mixed camp, on that side. Obviously, there's been changes attempted, over the years to look at that. That was the feeling coming in. Is there a viable option to LOF? And people said no. If we were to lose LOF, then what are we going to do tomorrow? What's going to give us the same, criteria that's set by the LOF, that we can act quickly? We've got incentives built into to reward salvos for the 27 availability, readiness, equipment, etc. That. So they felt there was a big gap if it did disappear of that. And I asked the question, just curious of that, just trying for my own benefit of that, looking at best endeavours with an LOF, and they felt they were getting an equivalent service if people went for other commercial contracts. But they felt no, that was not the case. 70-odd% felt the LOF itself were getting a better return on that side. Side letters, okay? Side letters was new to me. I started reading about it after I was asked to do the review. I wasn't aware. Won't say how frequent they were when I was in post of that. Probably quite pleased I wasn't aware of them, at the time of that. But I asked the questions, who was responsible for the addition of side letters? And again, looking at the blue lines there, yellow is where it's come, it was a multi-choice question, it's where it's appeared, as, may not necessarily be the first one. But hull and machinery underwriters, coming down to contractors, salvos, and then down to, legal representatives. right down to cargo underwriters. I'm not going to dwell on it or that, but that was the outcome. Use of side letters was felt there's a requirement to educate people on the use of side letters. There's really mixed feelings regarding it. I think when they were set up by one or two clubs, initially, or parties, on that side, there's a feeling that people have picked side letters up, adapted them to their own needs, and perhaps they're not providing the same cover, with contracts now that they might think they're getting. But a strong feeling that there needs more education, more discussion on that side. I think the perception there, the use of, or people believing, one reason for the side letters is perception awards are too generous. So by implementing the side letters, it's a way of cutting down the overall costs, on that side. I asked a number of questions regarding, validity of LOFs if side letters are in place. People felt it did impact it, but equally there were a number of people that were quite happy, in their usage as such. I asked the question, the fact that, and it's fairly even, on there, as there is a number of side letters, is that simply telling us there's a need to go in and change the LOF anyway? I'm not a lawyer, but I would ask the question myself for that. If you put a side letter into an LOF, is it still technically an LOF, or is it just another commercial contract? So just to throw that into you as a bit of a, like, think about it. And again, asking people about the implications, as I said, I've covered that, and whether it can prejudice, cover, and the camp was pretty split on that. Just going to touch on Maritime Authorities. And again, bear in mind, the review was all about trying to minimise delays. So people felt overwhelmingly that the appointment of an individual, such as we've got the source rep here, the MERCOM, in Australia, and other equipments, equivalents, Breffy Maritime, etc., that felt it was very good that having such a person should, and generally does, reduce the timescale, for moving forward of that and getting approvals, etc., if that's what's required. It was clear that people were feeling, maritime authorities are going to become a lot more proactive, and we're seeing that over the years anyway. People are perhaps asking more on that side. I asked a question about places of refuge, whether people felt the choice of contract could have an effect on a request for a place of refuge. Now, I know, and Stephen can correct me later on of that, I know when I was in post, our policy was that financial considerations would not get in the way of us making operational decisions we felt were in the best interest of the state. But I know that's not the case globally on that side, so it can have an impact depending on the contract you've got, and people are looking for guarantees behind that. And I asked a question about whether Maritime Authorities should be giving a copy of the contract. I always wanted a copy of the contract. I never got a copy of the side letters because I didn't know they existed. So I would know better. If I ever went back into the post of that, I would know to ask for that in the future of that on that side. What I didn't want to know was how much it was costing. I wasn't interested in that. I simply wanted to know that there was a contract there. It was going to be fit for purpose to do the job. Educational requirements. Again, overwhelmingly here, and this was from all the sectors that I looked at in the review, people felt there was a need for education. So there was nobody really coming back saying, no, we're happy, we've had enough of that, or there's too much of that. There might have been, the odd 1 or 2% of that. And that may be from companies, because I know there are a lot of organisations that are extremely proactive, with education of that, and that might be looking after their own clients or whatever of that. So I know there is a lot ongoing of that. And it was felt that stakeholders, in general, need a lot more information on the types of contracts that are available, and the implications of delays, itself as well. There was some calls, 40-odd%, nearly 50%, saying there should be more clarification and simplification, forms. I can't think of anything simpler. I'm not here to sell LOF. It might sound like it, but I can't think of anything simpler than an LOF form. It probably gets more complicated when people start adding other clauses or side letters, to all that. So what are the headlines, from gathered this information of that? Well, I think delays, are occurring. Getting ahead of myself. And definitely appear, with the evidence, we'll back it up to be on the increase of that. I was extremely impressed, across the board with some of the initiatives being taken by some organisations across the sector, trying to put procedures or, other things in place to mitigate against, any delays. So education and lots of things going on there. But I still feel, and I've been hearing this for years, so a number of people in here I've heard talking about it, a need for more collaboration, and better working together, across the different sectors. So it's not a new thing, but perhaps it's time we've got to start doing something about it if that's what's required. So a need for greater collaboration. I think there's a need for a lot more accountability. Who is responsible? And again, when I start getting to things like masters, and it does throw up some gaps in the system, I think, and who actually at the end of the day is going to be accountable for decisions that are being taken or are not being taken, on that side. Or you could take it further, are allowing it, really, substantial delays, and what could the consequences of that be for individuals as such of that. I do understand, for speaking to different sectors, that depending where you sit, within this, that a lot of underwriters and insurers are seeking greater financial predictability and certainty over costs. But when you're dealing with casualty situations, I could argue it's perhaps not that possible. You're in, I suppose, a business of risk, so perhaps it always can't be as clear-cut as people would like on that side. I was disappointed with some of the comments coming in, that again, and it's not everyone, I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush here, but I was disappointed that some parties appear to measure success of an incident on the financial outlay to the possible detriment of other factors, and I'm coming back to the environment. It might be a secondary consideration at that time, although people may have it, in their business plans and the sustainability booklets, etc. But it doesn't always come across. And it does start to question a bit. There's lots of questions that come in related to awards, and it brings you back looking at the Salvage Convention itself and really asking, is it fit for purpose, today, or do people need to look at that again from that point of view? So delays, I talked about masters of that. I mean, I think the camp was quite split on this one, of that. A lot of people felt masters don't have a responsibility to make contracts. Communications are better now. People on the shore will make them, on that side. Some people were saying powers, the review should point people back to giving the powers back to masters. They should have the powers, anyway of that. But I know the world we live in, it's unlikely we're going to turn the clock back. But we're getting lots of examples coming in that, where decisions are being made on behalf of the master, perhaps by, the designated person ashore or another party within the organisation. Then sometimes it was felt there was no even real, discussion with the master on what the requirements were, on that side. So I can understand with the technology and the way things have progressed over the years that people should be helping, providing there are lots of other services available in the background, like ERS and other systems that can help make decisions on, what's required. But I think there still needs to be a lot of discussion. Legally, I suppose, it's the master that has the responsibility. He's the one, himself and his crew, that we were all concerned about at one time, about criminalisation. But we now have a situation where people are perhaps making decisions on behalf of the master, but I don't know who they are. Quite often we don't know who they are. I'm sure if there was a major incident, people will drill down to that. But I think if other people in the background are going to be making it, then we've got to ensure that they're educated, they're aware, they know what they're taking on board, they know what the risks are, the benefits or not of different types of contract on that side, and it should be clear who's going to have that ultimate accountability. There's need for, communications I'm going to touch on later on, I think need to be improved, but we're seeing a lot of decisions being made by committee as well, which some people were telling me was a good thing. But that's the reason why the UK went for a soft rep system, because people were trying to manage by committee, and it didn't work, and we realised the hard way with a number of instances. But we're seeing that happening with a lot of other decisions. So again, there's a need to ensure decision makers have a sound understanding, the types of contract, the advantages, disadvantages. I was hearing from some parties that if a ship owner is a bit uncertain the way forward, he might go to his hull underwriters and get some advice. If he's still not clear, he might go to his P&I club and seek advice. But in some cases, the ship owners were getting conflicting information. That can't be good. Where does the ship owners go when that's the case of that? So I think there's got to be more collaboration between parties to help out and to try and move forward. I think people are, I'm going to come on to it, people are working in silos. In my mind, if we were going to set up an organisation today to deal with casualties, we might not have all the separate organisations that we have today of that, so there might be different ways. Certainly if we're going to work with the separate organisations, there's got to be a way for people to talk better across them. Financial, in my mind, easy to say, I'm not paying the bills, but financial considerations should not influence, in my mind, operational decisions. If people feel there's a thing that needs to be done to either, protect safety or protect the environment, then, okay, you might not meet the bottom line that year, but it shouldn't be, in my mind, the decision, the factor that's going to make the decision. And I've put up there, if you are using, and it's your choice, if you are using other commercial contracts, and you've agreed a fixed premium or whatever fixed price of that, you've got to be aware that if a situation starts to deteriorate, then there could be a lot of time wasted when people are going to have to go back and get approvals to go to the next stage or keep going. Choice of salvage contract. Again, financial contract, we've said that, significant influence the type of contract. Cultural differences, different markets, may have an influence. But again, even where people have finally decided we're going to use the LOF, we're seeing these side letters, coming in as well, which is throwing things a bit up in the air. And again, I'm saying the choice of salvage contract in the longer term, and I'm coming from the angle, LOF was, through the Salvage Convention, to put money back into the salvage industry. If you want somebody there to respond in the future, if we're all going to go for the cheapest contract, we're using, different contracts, or even LOF, but cutting out awards on that side, then in 10 years' time, when ship owners do have an incident, there may be nobody to respond, and it may be back to insurers, ship owners, insurers, and their other underwriters to come up with their own systems, which I would imagine will be a lot more expensive than dealing with what we have today. So the LOF contract, I'm nearly there, you'll be pleased to hear. Recognised by most as a fantastic product. The descriptors I got back when I asked people's feelings about Lloyds are that simple, straightforward, speedy, timely response, no cure, no pay, it's fair, efficient. People say that, but they don't actually use it when it becomes an option, and even when they think they may need it on that side. But again, it's the most recognised contract. And again, my feelings, looking at what's happened historically, that any efforts to attract more users by updating the forms, with the introduction of Scopic, with the internal reviews, where there's been concerns over awards, and education to date is little done. I don't mean this as an unfairness, because I know there's a lot of people going out there and working hard, educating, but whatever we're doing or not doing, we're still seeing a decline. We may see every year it can fluctuating up and down, but we're not seeing the numbers that we perhaps need for Lloyds to sustain the system, on that side. I'm saying there, I feel there should be a fair reward, for services rendered, but also I think there should be some safeguards built into the system. Obviously, the most obvious ones that people may talk about, is there any fraud that people were saying historically they've seen this in the past? Again, it's back to this lack of trust, lack of transparency, which doesn't help. But I think also looking at it, and I know a lot of cleverer people than me have looked at this over the years, I think if you've got a situation where, whether it's a broker or whatever, has an incident, makes a decision on the information he's got at the time, and let's say he goes for an LOF, but later on in the incident when more information comes in, we find it's not as serious as he perhaps felt it was. What we shouldn't be seeing is people getting penalised and paying, really high awards when, if it had been a commercial contract, perhaps, the cost would have been, a lot fairer on that side. So I'm thinking, I wouldn't like to see people being penalised on that side for acting, or putting their best efforts into what they've seen at that time on that side. And I think that's all I'm going to say on that one. Obviously, the review's ongoing. The side letters, I was surprised, 85% came back and said they were quite familiar, with the practices. I was one of the ones that wasn't aware of it, so there we go. And again, most people felt, they're there to reduce costs. To be fairness to some of the parties that use them, some felt they had agreements between parties that meant resources could be deployed a lot quicker. But it did, mean in some cases, resources, salvers, might be getting deployed without a contract. Who's to say at the end of the day, contracts are the right ones going to be signed on that side. So I think there is a bit of risk in it. It takes a lot of trust on that side, but mainly it's to reduce costs. Again, annual costs, may be achieved, but great danger, no investment in the future, and we're going to see fewer people. I mean, even in my short space of time as source rep or deputy to source rep, you know, I saw the demise of Titans, Fitz and Mammut. Ardent's gone, and I do appreciate there might be some people in here today. There are some new salvers also appearing, and it might be quite cyclic in that way. But I think, again, the overall trend is some of the larger ones are disappearing of that. I think there needs to be, you know, side letters. I don't think, my personal view, they do very little to build trust, you know, between parties, even when they are aware. You know, very few people perhaps cite what the content is, you know, on that side. So I personally don't think it's a good thing. I've added this in. I don't specifically mention ESG, you know, in it or that, but I'm just saying, irrespective of the type of contract, again, you know, there is a need. If we want to have a salvage industry in the future, we've got to find some way of investing. So if we're going to cut it out, you know, with all the cheaper contracts, then again, it's over to you, you know, where your resources are going to come from. Maritime Authorities, often ignored until the salvage contract is awarded, you know, and there's a reliance then that the state will be happy with the contract and the services that's going to be provided. All I'm saying on there, with the technology we've got today, which is fantastic, a quick phone call, you know, to say what's being proposed or whatever. I'm not looking to incur any further delays. I mean, even when I was in post, you know, I could name, you know, P&I clubs or whatever would call me and give me the heads up, and quite often I was getting a quick, you know, phone call from somebody before the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency told me, you know, my own teams are that. So if people want to do it, if there's a will to do it, people will do it of that. But I think people use it all, you know, sometimes as a bit of an obstacle. It's going to take more time on that side, but there's got to be much more dialogue. Globally, you know, I've said the contract types can, you know, get in the way then, depending what the future services are. You might not think you need a place of refuge at the beginning of the incident, but again, it's looking at that worst case scenario, what might happen. And I know that some states are seeking earlier triggers that will permit them to intervene even earlier than they do today, and that can't be necessarily a good thing, you know, on that side. If it's coming to that, it's showing that something's broken. Communications and collaboration. I think we've got lots of communications. We've got to start using them. It's fairly simple. The source rep side, we have a major incident. Very quickly, we set up a salvage control unit. That can be done virtually. We've all been working virtually through COVID of that, and it's worked. Business has gone on of that. So there's no reason people can't consider doing similar things between, you know, underwriters, P&I clubs, salvers, etc., and just having a quick chat to make sure everyone's on board with that. There is a need for crossing industry dialogue throughout a casualty, not just when a party has a leader primacy. Except the feeling I was getting quite strongly is it may start off traditional incident, you know, with hull and machinery underwriter. Others will be watching of that, and then it'll get passed to the next one. There's a lot of knowledge. I mean, hull and machinery underwriters were telling me in some cases there was a bit less knowledge in some areas. They knew other people, perhaps in P&I clubs, that had more knowledge in particular areas, more experience at dealing with casualties. But there seemed to be a bit of a reluctance for people to engage with one another. So I really think you've got to start working better on that side. Again, knowledge transfer, you know, thinking the worst case scenario, need for more openness and trust. And again, maybe I'm being a bit idealist of that, but I think the goal for most people in here should be to minimise the risk to life, the vessel, its cargo, and the environment. I know it might affect your bonuses, you know, at the end of the year if you spend more money than you're permitted to, but that's the business we're in. Education, as I said, 95% of people felt this was a big area. We're not doing enough. We're doing a lot of education. We're doing a tremendous amount, but are we educating the right people, you know, on that side? I mean, quite often you go along to conferences, it's the same faces. Are these the same people that are going to be making the decisions if we're unlucky enough to have a casualty? So it's trying to look at that. There are some great initiatives. There's a lot of comments made that a lot of people, you know, do training or education for the clients, but that's quite biased, you know, towards them. So it's looking at doing something a bit more cross-industry so people are seeing the different perspectives, and it lets them be a bit more informed if they're making decisions. I've suggested an education group, a steering group. I know there's a lot of work in all these things, and a lot of people coming to me during the process offering the services for training. A lot of experienced people are that. We've done it that way in the past. I think it's got to be a bit more coordinated, a bit more structured. You know, I think we could look at standards. You know, what sort of training do we need to be delivering? Who to? I mean, look at the legal side and you look at CPDs. I mean, I only found out after I wrote the report about, I think it's P&IQ, different qualifications. So there are things out there, but I think there's a need to pull the best practices together and maybe look at something longer term that's going to be of the benefit to all on that side. Code of practice, again, a lot of work involved, but I think it would be extremely beneficial. The agreements that I tended to see, when I asked for evidence, were mainly financial related, how costs are going to be split up of that, but very little about collaboration, and working together, with a common goal of that. So I think there's a need for stakeholders to fully understand their individual role and the role of other stakeholders in other organisations and how you should all be working together on that side. There's need for clarity and accountability, and that, in my mind, is personal accountability and corporate, on that side as well. Need to understand the risks in decision-making and potential impact, consequences. Need for improved comms, joint participation in education training, sharing lessons and best practices. And it might be a sort of forum or something that might, if it took off of that, have some side groups that could see the benefits of that or that. And I did get some comments, from cargo interest that, some of them felt they'd been left out the party of that. There were lots of agreements between other parties, but obviously they've got a part to play within the instance as well of that. And again, with a code of practice, if it was inclusive with everyone, then it would be perhaps a great reference document for new people coming into the industry. People like myself, we're moving on. There's a lot younger ones coming in of that, and it would be good if we could share some of our experience with others it's coming through. So in conclusion, I'd just like to thank the IG for asking me to carry out this important review, and thank you to most people in this room for your contribution. Without your support, I wouldn't have anything to put on paper. Maybe you're regretting actually being open and honest with me and giving me things to put in it. All I'm saying there now is please take time to go through the report, and although you may not agree with all of the recommendations, I do hope you agree with some of them, on that side. You consider what changes your organisation could make to ensure that all decision makers have the right education and situational awareness to make informed decisions. And finally, if you can put financial considerations to one side, even for a second, please ask yourself if your organisation is doing all that it can to prevent or minimise delays and provide for a sustainable response to the future. And I think on the back of that, I'd like to think, even if we could pull some of this together, going back to where I was 5 years ago, then perhaps we can get back on track and make it a bit more of a brighter future. So many thanks.
Thanks very much, Hugh. All your effort and fantastic feedback which we've had, which you've coordinated and put together into this very helpful report. Some of the key words that were jumping out at me during that were collaboration, accountability, communication, education, transparency, and fairness. But perhaps the most important of those is collaboration across the industry. And today we've got a panel who hopefully will be able to show that willingness to collaborate. To introduce them, we are very lucky to have Peter Townsend. Peter's worked in the marine insurance market in London for over 44 years. A graduate in economics and a fellow of the Chartered Insurance Institute, he's been an underwriter at Lloyds Syndicates, a Lloyds broker, and also head of Marine London at Swiss Re. Peter is past chairman of the Joint Hull Committee and has served on various London market committees as well as the IUME Ocean Hull Committee, and still serves as a committee member of the Insurance Institute of London. During his period as a Lloyds broker, he's worked in both the direct and reinsurance markets, developing bespoke products for his clients. Presently, he is the principal for Ensign Consultancy, providing professional services to the shipping industry, and he currently provides consultancy services to Miller Insurance Brokers, an international group P&I club, plus independent review roles. So I'm going to hand you over to Peter, who's going to come up and introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nick. and thank you, Hugh, for that very insightful report. And I personally think it's something that should form the foundation for any development in LOF. I feel very privileged to have been asked to moderate this forum and to share the platform with some of the very top professionals in the salvage field, including the audience as well. I feel very humble, and if we can't get it done with this sort of forum, we'll never get it done at all, I don't think. But, introducing the panel, obviously Hugh has already been introduced, but next up is Nick Shaw, who I'm sure we all know and needs very little introduction, but he is the CEO of the International Group of P&I Clubs. He was appointed that position in 2009. He's responsible for the coordination of the collective activities of the International Group member clubs, including the internal organisation of the group activities, coordinating the formulation and development of group policies, the operation of the group large claims pooling and reinsurance arrangements, and the representation of the group at inter-industry, government and intergovernmental levels. Nick has practiced in shipping and marine insurance law since 1990 and has extensive knowledge and experience of the shipping industry and the P&I world, coupled with considerable high-level management experience gained as a shipping group practice leader at the former Richards Butler from 2003 to 2007, and following its merger with US-based international law firm Reed Smith as global shipping industry group leader from 2007 to 2019. Has extensive experience of the Asian market, having lived and worked in Hong Kong for 2 years and managed teams there and in Singapore. To your left, my right, we have Jeremy Russell, KC. He's a highly experienced arbitrator, having practiced for 38 years as a barrister, specialising in international commercial shipping and aviation law. In 2015, he ceased taking on new work as counsel to focus on his practice as arbitrator and mediator. He has considerable experience of dealing with complex technical cases, requiring an ability to master a range of engineering and scientific expert advice. He has acted or advised in over 400 salvage cases, and in 2016 he was appointed the Lloyds Salvage Appeal Arbitrator, having previously been a member of the Lloyds panel of first instance arbitrators. Apologies, it's not just like my children looking at my phone, but Kevin Clark, unfortunately, has been fallen foul of COVID, but we've got more than adequate, a very adequate substitute in the form of David Lawrence. We're very privileged to have. So I've got to read his bio from my phone, so apologies there. David Lawrence heads up the market engagement team at Lloyds. The team within the Market Oversight and Delivery Directorate acts as a centre of excellence for best-in-class market engagement and service delivery, and provides support services to multiple Lloyds market stakeholder groups. The marine support services provided by the team extend to a global client base. This includes management of the Lloyds agency branch and the Lloyds Salvage and Arbitration branch. David chairs the SCOPIC committee and is a member of the Lloyds Salvage Group. Next up, we have Captain Nick Sloan, FNA, who's president of the International Salvage Union. Nick was born in Zambia and finished high school at Kearney College in South Africa, and he still lives near Cape Town. He joined the Merchant Navy in 1980 with SAF Marine and has been involved in casualties and salvage since 1983, nearly 40 years. He had his first LOF as a salvage master in 1987 on the VLCC Tassia. Nick has responded to incidents globally across the Middle East, Far East, North and South America, and around the continent and islands of Africa. Major casualties attended include the Costa Concordia, Rena, Tasman Spirit, the Jolly Rubino, Sealand Express, Tokal, Treasure, Icantandra, Castillo de Belva, Brillante Virtuosa, as well as 8 oil rigs and aircraft recovery from deep water, and more than 100 other casualties and oil spill responses around the world. Captain Sloan has also been involved in the installation of pipelines, SBMs, gravity bases and control buoys around Africa and the Black Sea. He was appointed to the Lloyds panel of special casualty representatives in 2010 and currently serves with Resolve Marine as Senior Salvage Master and Regional Director. He's a Fellow of the Nautical Institute and an Honorary Fellow of the International Institute of Marine Surveyors. Nick was awarded the German Ocean Award in 2015 and an Italian knighthood after the Costa Concordia operations. He's married to Sandra and has 3 children, and for recreation, I don't think you've got very much of that, he loves golf, sailing and riding. And last but certainly not least, we've got Nick Coleman at the other end of the panel, who's the chairman of the Ayumi Salvage Forum. Nick has got 18 years in marine insurance, 7 years with Codan, 3 years at ship owner KGJS, 8 years at Guard, all Bergen-based. Nick has a legal background and deals primarily with hull and machinery and loss of hire claims for Scandinavian clients, predominantly container ships. Chair of Ayumi Salvage Forum since 2021, wide experience with all kinds of salvage cases from an H&M and owner's perspective. He's got 3 children, so he's also got limited spare time, but he plays golf when he can. Probably with Nick Sloan, I would think. Right, so please welcome the panel. As I said, we've got a really incredibly high quality panel, so I'm sure it's going to provoke debate, and so hopefully my job's going to be very easy. I moved into a village, and almost immediately, the only pub closed down. I can see that surprises some of you. The village people that campaigned for the reinstatement of the pub were the same people who caused the shutdown through lack of support of that pub. Is LOF heading to be the maritime analogy for my local pub? We had a big campaign lobbying against proposals to shut the Lloyds Salvage and Arbitration Board. Are we looking for the LOF comfort blanket being there, but without ever really looking to adequately support it? Has LOF fallen out of favour? Is there an inverse correlation between the decline in the number of LOFs and an increase in delays? Obviously, it's the EIG's belief that delays were occurring and are on the rise, hence the reports. And interestingly, over 80% of the respondents felt that avoidable delays over contracting and engagement of salvage services could lead to an escalation in the situation. So we've got an awful lot. We could spend days talking about this, but I would like to invite each of the panel members to say a few words about the report and their views from their respective corners, and then I would like to perhaps go through some of the recommendations and invite the panel's views on those. So, Nick, would you be sorry, Nick Shaw. There's too many Nicks, too many Shaws. Nick Shaw, would you be kind enough to...
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you. I'll be relatively brief because I think there's an awful lot in this report. I think some of the key points, education and training. Clearly, we have some new stakeholders in the industry, particularly in the Asian market, who are still grappling with LOF and getting used to it. And I think we really need to concentrate on education, targeting the decision makers, whoever they may be. It may be a combination of people, but certainly not just the master in most cases these days. And in order to do that, we need to win their confidence in the system. And that means also looking at the awards, ensuring there is some transparency in those awards as much as possible. I'd be interested to hear Jeremy on that. Encouragement. I think encouragement for all parts of the salvage market is vital if we're going to have a sustainable salvage industry going forward, and for us to collaborate to ensure that that takes place. How we collaborate is open for discussion today, and I'm really interested in other ideas. But clearly we have momentum now through this report to establish potentially a working group which can look at some of the issues and some of the objectives that have been sent, and it should involve all parts of the industry. And that's very much, the objective, I think, behind commissioning this report is to get some proper evidence from Hugh as to what is actually happening now, some recommendations as to what we should be doing, and then to build an action plan going forward as to what the industry as a whole can do. So those are my opening comments. Thank you, Peter, and I'm interested as to the others' views. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. Jeremy Russell, perhaps we could add the arbitrator's view, please, the appeals arbitrators.
Well, first of all, I endorse the majority of Hugh's recommendations. In particular, I commend section 5.1. I think it should be printed out and framed on every hull underwriter's desk. I struggle with a couple of the recommendations because I think they will be difficult to implement in practice. I was going to run through a couple of those, but as I think we're going to be asked to comment on recommendations in due course, I won't now. But there are two things I think I would like to say at this stage. The first is it was sad but not surprising to see a number of the myths about LOF have crept into the report. Just as a quick test, how many underwriters or brokers do we have in the room? Could you put your hands up? 6, 7. That in itself is disappointing. Of those 6 or 7, how many of you have ever attended even part of an LOF arbitration? 1, 2. 3. Thank you. Okay, well, actually, that's not bad. I've raised that point for a couple of reasons. In my younger days, it would be routine for the more junior members of an underwriting team interested in the salvage to actually attend at least part of the arbitration so that they could see how the system worked and gain some understanding of how it was arbitrators came to the figures that they so dislike. So, as part of the education, I would actually encourage underwriters to send perhaps their more junior members to attend an arbitration from time to time, where hopefully they would see the law being applied fairly to the facts of the case, and the gripes about fairness would largely disappear. The second is to attack the myths, and that, of course, will be down in part to education. And again, if people attended arbitrations, this particular myth that cropped up in the report, paragraph 2.5.8 for those who are interested, where it is said that extreme or large demands by salvors led to large salvage awards. The reality is that arbitrators are not told and are not allowed to be told what security the salvor has demanded. Similarly, the arbitrators are not told and are not allowed to be told what size of award the salvor is looking for. Thus, a disproportionate demand, whatever that may mean, by a salvor simply cannot influence an arbitrator in coming to his decision or her decision because they haven't got a clue what the demand is. And yet people believe this rubbish. It's just a myth. It needs to be dealt with. Similarly, there is the usual thing about, historical abuse and misuse of LOF. Well, I'm sure we can all think of examples. But if you know of any modern or recent examples, for God's sake, raise them with the LSAB or your members on the LSG. It's no good muttering in the pubs of the city about misuse of the form if you don't actually tell the people who might be able to do something about putting a stop to it. These rumours do not do the system any good, and we need to address it. Again, comes back to education. Transparency, one of the things that Hugh said in his report was that he thinks that arbitration awards and settlements should be published. Arbitration awards are generally published. The rule is that an award must be published by Lloyds unless one of the parties to the arbitration applies at the hearing to the arbitrator with jolly good reasons why the award should not be published. I've only had one application made to me for not publishing, and I refused it. So as far as I'm aware, and David may know differently, the vast majority of awards are published. Admittedly, you have to have a subscription with LSAB to get access to them, but they are there. I think there is not a snowflake's chance in hell of getting settlements published. The reason I say that is that the arbitrators via the LSG asked if they, under conditions of strict secrecy, were permitted to see settlements so they could get some feel for what the market thought was a reasonable settlement, reasonable figure for certain types of case. That was met with an absolute blank refusal. We then said, can we please at least have some kind of anonymised sets of facts of cases that have settled so we can go away as a group among the arbitrators and discuss what we would have awarded in that case, so we get at least a feel for the sorts of things which are being done by way of settlement. It was agreed within the LSG 2 years ago that that would happen. The arbitrators have yet to see one single piece of paper. So yes, there is a need for more transparency, but I suspect there are limits to it. And I'm not criticising those who refuse to produce actual settlements because they are commercially very sensitive. There are all kinds of reasons, both on the Salvage side and on hull and cargo side, why they won't want those settlements disclosed. So I accept that. And that is one of the parts of Hugh's report, right, which I think is a good idea in theory, but simply won't wash in practice. So I'll shut up now and leave it to David.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's all my notes shredded anyway. David, please. LSAB's you.
Yeah, thank you. And as you mentioned, Peter, it was supposed to be Kevin Clark up here, and I'm not even going to try and compete with his 42 years plus of experience, but I'll try my best. I was busy scribbling notes, trying to think of something intelligent to say, and to the left I can see Jeremy's got highlighters and post-its around his notes, and Nick to my right's got less than 10 words on a napkin, so maybe I'm not too ill prepared for this. So some comments from my side. I think it is a very detailed, in-depth, welcome and timely report that has given everyone associated with Lloyds Open Forum food for thought. And I think it can be very helpful as well with our ongoing LOF review. Collaboration is one of the standout words. I think there needs to be greater collaboration amongst parties involved in LOF. Trust and transparency, again, two key words that resonated with me as I read through the report. Has trust diminished over the years? I'm probably not best to say. In conversations I've had with Kevin Clark, he suggests that the trust that was there in the past is not here today. So you then have to question, if that is the case, how can we rebuild this trust? And would greater transparency be part of the solution? I'm not quite as definitive with Jeremy as his views as to there's not a hope in hell chance of there being greater transparency on sharing awards and settlements, but time will tell on that. I think that if parties were to agree to that, it would require a seismic shift in attitude, which isn't there at the moment. This isn't all going to make sense and logic, but I'm just reading out the scribbles I put down here. Various recommendations include, in Hugh's report, actions to be taken by Lloyds and analysing data, and Lloyds is happy to play a role in that, but a lot of this data isn't available to Lloyds. Not only is it not published to the market, but we only see salved and settlement values on LOF cases that go to arbitration, so less than 25% of cases, so we would need that joint collaboration from all parties to be prepared to share data if Lloyds was to proceed with some of the recommendations in Hugh's report. When it comes to the LOF review that has been ongoing since since Lloyds made a decision to continue with Lloyds Open Forum. I'm not sure all parties are aware of the latest position, but it's been agreed that we focus on 3 specific work streams, and they do thankfully and helpfully align with a number of the recommendations within the report. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but work stream number 1 is looking at LOF as an asset in helping meeting environmental, social and governance responsibilities. Hugh's picked up on some of the decisions as to what form to use, and if it's not purely driven by financial, which I think most parties agree it shouldn't be, then tapping into ESG and trying to help parties come up with how we can measure and articulate the environmental benefits of utilising LOF, I think is key, and it's something that the working group will proceed with. Second recommendation is quite niche, but it is focusing on Asia and the Far East, looking to see how we can encourage use of LOF in that region and by stakeholders based in that region. And then the third work stream, which is probably going to take up more time than the other 2, focuses on awards and costs. And we published to stakeholders involved in the review these work streams, and under LOF awards and costs, a couple of the key points we called out was identifying how more LOFs, awards and settlement data can be made available to improve understanding and transparency of the process, and then exploring the benefits and practicalities of the publication of an annual report of worldwide salvage capability and year-on-year investment. I mean, the list goes on, but there's lots to do and there's lots to think about here, but I mean, the summary point here is that this report has been incredibly helpful, I think, and will help us going forward.
Excellent. You from the ISU.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Pete. Firstly, a great honour and privilege for the ISU to be invited here today, an esteemed panel and audience, and of course in the Library of Lloyds, which is globally revered. LOF, the demise, delays in award of the contract, certainly a huge concern for the salvage industry as well. We've got numerous cases where these delays have actually led to a complete loss of value, sometimes a CTL and a 100% loss of cargo as well. So certainly time does not improve a casualty situation when the crews have asked for outside assistance. I think education of personnel around the world, authorities, the underwriting community, ship owners, ship management, is actually vitally important, and the ISU would love to collaborate along with all the other parties on this, because we think we could add case studies where these delays actually have led to a complete loss. I think if you look back at the origins of Lloyds Open Forum, it started here in London with Lloyds, and it was there to encourage people to actually respond, to minimize the loss. Of course, the environmental concerns 100 years ago were not what they are today. But if I think of the Castillo de Belvedere 39 years ago, my first Lloyds Open Forum was 273,000 tons of oil was lost. The ship was lost. There was no Article 14. There was no SCOPIC. So it was a loss to all parties. Obviously, that was long before the Salvage Convention and SCOPIC. And I think we are part of an era where we're going to see the evolution of the Lloyds Open Forum into the next era. And we'd like to be part of that. If you think of the situations where there have been delays, I'm just going to raise 3 of them just as an example. So the first one would be Friday, the 5th of September, 2001. A ship called the Ekin Thunder has mechanical problems shortly after breakfast on a Friday morning. The ship management company was in Singapore. They were told to stand by. Unfortunately, there was a winter storm on the go, 85 knots of wind, 20-meter swells, and by lunchtime they hadn't had feedback from their offers on what to do, it was actually too late. They were in the back line of the surf. The ship was eventually refloated, 100% loss of cargo, and the CTL declared 100% loss of ship. If she had actually had feedback in the 4 hours before, or whether the master was empowered to make a decision, not only did he prevent the loss of his ship and cargo, but the ship's crew were in huge danger. And as Hugh mentioned, very few people actually look at that as a deciding factor of when they're going to add value into the situation from somewhere 6,000 miles away. If you go to 2006 in the West of Skelder here, you've got a container ship, the Fairfareet. So she ran aground. Unfortunately, she ran aground before the high tide. There was a delay on instructions to the master. The master wanted an immediate refloat. That instruction did not come until after the next tide, and by that time she had broken her back. Again, that was somewhere that in a river you'd consider relatively benign weather conditions, but never forget the tide and the power of water, and a ship that is partially aground is not in a good situation at all. If you go to the Cheshire off the Canary Islands 4 or 5 years ago, that started off as a discussion about cargo that was heating up. This cargo was the same cargo that caused Texas City blow up many years ago. So it's a cargo that, if you lose control of it, can cause incredible damage. Initially, there was a day's discussion on the terms of a wreck hire. On day 3, the crew were evacuated, and then it was deemed that it was actually maybe time for an LOF scopic. Again, once that cargo goes into self-combustion, the heat's generated, and the transfer of the heat without boundary cooling means that you lose all the cargo, and the ship's damage was a CTL, so that was 100% loss of cargo and ship. We've been invited to the IMO on the 8th of November to actually give a presentation, because even the members of the IMO committees say that they need education because they're not sure actually how to deal with it. I can say that in 39 years I've never had a SARD letter, so hopefully those do not delay responses. I think that a Lloyds open form is quick and simple. Maybe it's time to have the evolution of the Lloyds open form, and I think these discussions are ongoing, but it is quick. The ISU members fund the LOF until the award. So there's no discussion between time charterers, owners, ship management of who's going to put up money and actually pay for this. It is all taken care of with that simple agreement to Lloyds open form terms. That's a factor that isn't really raised or understood a lot. But if you can imagine that sometimes it takes 18 months to 2 years to get your money back, that's quite an asset or a value of funding that the members of the salvage community carry out. So, Hugh, congratulations on the report. It's very thorough, and there's going to be some controversial points, I'm sure, but well done, and thank you just to have us here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. A thorough report, interesting. I think the very fact that the report is here on the table now is a good step in the right direction. The focus is there. We will be more on our toes, I think, when it comes to salvage and delays. One thing I was slightly disappointed about was the number of responses, and I think you mentioned it yourself, from certain hull markets and from owners/managers. I mean, they are the two parties really in the driving seat of salvage in the initial stages, and it would have been very good to get a more wider degree of response from those two sections of the market. But I understand. I mean, it was arduous, hard work. Took a long time to put together, and you know, this was what we got. But it's there. I think, I mean, it's interesting listening to Nick's examples here, and I would be very interested to dig a little more into the reasons behind the delays. Obviously, the Cheshire you mentioned was on a wreck hire initially. But the other two cases, were the delays actually due to contract negotiations, or were there other issues at play? I don't know, but that's something we can discuss afterwards. I think just a couple of points I'd like to make in addition. LOF, I mean, I was quite shocked to hear that there are certain insurers, possibly members of IUMI, that have standing orders not to contract Salvos on LOF terms. I mean, that's frankly irresponsible, to say the least. And we would strongly discourage that, and yeah, we will be taking it up in the IUMI circles. I think most of IUMI's members do not have that kind of standing order on their procedures, and most are willing to enter into an LOF where it's absolutely necessary. But what's important to bear in mind, I think LOF, it's not magic. I mean, it's a good contract. It's quick. You know what you're getting. It's not a magic solution to all casualties. You have to. I mean, it's not as if you can agree an LOF and then the casualty will solve itself. An LOF is a process where the salvors, without necessarily having assets of their own, have to go out into the market, contract on commercial terms, get the assets in, and fix the problem. So LOF is not the be-all and end-all, and delays potentially can still arise, but you need to know when and where to use it. In terms of trust, coming back to Jeremy, we do follow the Lloyds arbitration awards, and I have to say recently the last 4 or 5 awards, I mean, I don't see any cause for concern when reading the awards. I think the vast majority in recent times have been actually within the range of what should be acceptable and reasonable and perfectly okay for hull underwriters to pay. The CSCL Jupiter, for example, big container ship. I don't know how many tugs were involved in that case. You will probably remember, Jeremy, 20 plus, and an award of $10 million. You look at that case and you think, well, that's fine. This is what we should be paying for these kind of incidents. I think in terms of trust, I think it is. I mean, there was a period 10, 15 years ago where I think it perhaps bottomed out, but it's certainly on the way back up. And I don't think insurers need to be worried that the system will beat them, if they sign an LOF, to be honest. So some recommendations, some specific recommendations in the report I think are definitely worth following up. Education has been mentioned. I think that's the most important, to be honest, getting education out there to the right parties. DPAs were mentioned quite specifically in the report. Very important that they know what they're dealing with, the consequences of the different salvage contracts. So that's something that we would like to be involved in and follow up. And I think we have the IG list of vessels, the IG ship search. If we can mirror that on the hull and machinery side, that would be also, I think, a good step in the right direction. Obviously, the Scandinavian underwriters generally have that information readily available, but if we can push it out globally to be able to pinpoint exactly who is the hull and machinery claims lead behind a vessel in any situation, that would be another step in the right direction in sort of transparency and accountability, not least. And I'd just like to finish by mentioning the subject of accountability. You brought it up. This is a little tested area. There are a number of lawyers in the room, but I mean, in a typical casualty situation, you have a claims lead taking the decision on salvage together with owners and perhaps brokers. I mean, if a claims lead insurer delays contracting to such an extent that it amounts to negligence, and the liabilities and the costs and the exposure at the end of the day are far greater than what it would have been had he done a good enough job, then clearly they can be liable to co-insurers and potentially to the P&I club for that negligence. There is, I think, accountability in law built into the system, which insurers should be aware of when they're dilly-dallying with salvage contracts.
Well, and the fact they might get a criminal action against them by the relevant state, which I don't think a lot of people actually think about.
Well.
So, all in all, I think a lot of positive steps in the right direction, and as I say, I think there is trust. I think we can begin to trust the system. I don't think we need to be afraid of LOF, and we shouldn't be afraid of it.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's already quite illuminating as far as I'm concerned and quite thought-provoking. We're in danger of, if we go through all of the recommendations in depth, we'll still be here beyond the next rail strike and past the next IUME, which you can't miss that, Nick, because that's in Chicago, isn't it?
Correct.
Right, but let's just touch upon them. Hugh's recommendation, and I'm praising them, it was the first two really were the training of designated persons ashore to act as a prudent uninsured and err on the side of caution when contracting urgent salvage services when there is any doubts about the degree of risk. I think you're kind of kicking an open door there from every person's response on the panel.
Yeah, I'm not sure if ICS is here today, but I mean, I've had a lengthy discussion. I think it clashed with another meeting on their side today, but they were very supportive to do a lot more work with ship owners, getting that in place, and even perhaps going to the next stage that, you know, if you look at the guidelines for DPAs, there's no mention of things like salvage. You know, so maybe getting it as part of the curriculum, you know, for them, or that would be a good start as well. So we're very helpful to try and push these two through. So,
But we're still going to have some issues within that, despite everyone's buy-in. So, for example, addressing the potential conflict between the property underwriters and the P&I clubs, possibly. And you know, will DPAs be pressured by underwriters and brokers to not use LOF, even when LOF is a prudent choice, or use side letters? And maybe does the training need to extend to underwriters and brokers? Given the paucity of underwriters and brokers that are here today, it appears that the perception differs maybe from reality, and perhaps some of the training may alleviate some of those concerns that are perceived rather than real. And I think that's very valid there. But, recommendation 3 was that the LSAB to analyse the size of awards and to compare with the cost of pre-contracted award or capped LOF. Jeremy's touched upon that and some of the issues perhaps relating to that. Maybe, David, you could add a little bit more of, but I invite both of you to comment on that recommendation, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so as mentioned in my comments earlier, Lloyds only has access to a certain level of data at the moment. So for us to be able to undertake an in-depth review and try to see these comparisons, we would need parties to be prepared to share that information with us. So yeah, I mean, it's one for discussion in Lloyds Salvage Group, I think.
The only thing I would add, this is one of the recommendations where, as I said at the beginning, I think it runs into what is practicable. First of all, LSAB is very, very lightly manned. It's essentially 3 people and no dog. How Lloyds can do the research over the last 2 decades to analyse the size of awards and address the perceived disparity between the cost for a case where an incident is dealt with, A, by means of a pre-award commercial contract, and B, a standard LOF contract. But you've got to compare apples with apples, because otherwise it's meaningless. As David said, where do they get the data for what it might have cost on a commercial basis for these cases over the last 20 years? Who's going to pay for the research? Where's the data going to come from? I'm not knocking the idea at all. I'm just saying there are considerable practical and hence financial difficulties with the recommendation. And also the suggestion is that the award under a standard LOF be compared with an LOF with a side letter capping Article 13. Well, given that Hugh has said in his report that the vast majority of people who employ side letters don't inform Lloyds that they're doing so, although that is a requirement of Lloyds, that those who use LOF and side letters have to notify them at least of the existence of a side letter, how can you expect Lloyds to do the research? You can't. So it's a nice idea in theory, but it would need a heck of a lot of work to make it even begin to work in practice, and LSAB would have to set up a research department. So, Peter, that's my answer to that.
Thank you. I mean, Hugh's report notes that 75 to 80% of LOF cases are settled without publication. And so Hugh is actually of the opinion, and I don't disagree, that there needs to be more openness and transparency.
Sorry, can I just, I mean, just to one of the points in around recommendation 2 and 3, where it's 5.3.6, a bit nerdy here, but many stakeholders felt that the publishing of all awards and or settlements might help to encourage use of the form in the future. There was, however, also strong opposition to this, with some saying that the publication of settlements may mean that fewer settled, leading to arbitration where costs would be even higher. I mean, I'd be really interested to get under the skin of that point a bit more as to why that would be the case. Is it because people, you know, what is the fear here? I mean, to me, it is what it is, and we talk about education and transparency. The more open we are, you know, there's less of a void to fill when it comes to perception. And I think, I mean, I'm all for education as well, but education needs to be back. People want data to back it up, and we're hampered by that lack of data, I feel.
And I guess there's the fear that with greater transparency give all parties more confidence in the equality issue, or would it highlight the disparities? I think is perhaps a concern there. Well, recommendation number 4 is that the Lloyds Salvage and Arbitration Board to support greater transparency to reduce the risk for abuse. So David, perhaps you could comment on what the ramifications would be were there to be no LSAB.
Actually, I think I'm probably the least equipped person to answer that one, in the sense that if Lloyds decided to turn it off, if there's no LSAB, there's no LOF run by Lloyds. And then it would be another form, because Lloyds would retain, they wouldn't let someone else retain Lloyd's name to it. So, yeah, I think as part of the review that was undertaken last year, I think it was clear to all that no LSAB, no LOF. So that's what people need to consider.
So the lobbying saved
Yeah, absolutely.
LOF and Lloyds,
Yes, it is.
LSAB. Well, that's valuing that alone. So I think we generally accepted from everyone the value of LSAB and the value of LOF. And so we've all got to play our part really there, I think. I think, Jeremy, you've touched upon one of the questions that I was going to ask, which is how easy it is for arbitrators to ensure that the awards are not disproportionate with commercial rates, which the Salvage Convention dictates they should be. Is there more to add?
Well, the Salvage Convention doesn't dictate that they should be comparable to commercial rates, doesn't say anything about commercial rates at all. And this is one of the aspects of Hugh's recommendations. This is recommendation 5, that I'm not saying there aren't answers, but that I do have difficulty. And just to read it to you very quickly, that LSAB should relaunch LOF to demonstrate they've addressed the industry's concerns and have criteria that reflect a fair award for the services rendered. So if I understand that recommendation correctly, what is suggested is that Lloyds somehow changed the criteria by reference to which awards are determined. By assigning an LOF, the parties agree that the contract is one for salvage and is governed by English law. As a matter of English law, if the matter goes to arbitration, the arbitrators have to apply Article 13 of the Salvage Convention. They provide the criteria by which a salvage award is calculated. Now, that is not something, and this is something I'm not sure underwriters fully appreciate, that is not something peculiar to Lloyds. It's in fact a matter of international law. If you do away with Lloyd's form and Salvage say, well, okay, we're going to start bringing effectively common law, or whatever the equivalent is, salvage claims in the local courts, any country which is a party to the convention will be applying precisely the same criteria as are applied by the salvage arbitrators, but with due respect to those courts, probably a lot less experience of salvage. So that the range of court judgments you get might be quite wildly different at either extreme to what you're currently getting under LOF arbitration. So I just think those underwriters who, frankly, would be quite happy to see LOF dead, should be slightly careful about what they wish for.
Question to Nick Sloan as well. With greater communication and greater transparency driven by the ISU, increase of industry confidence in LOF, do you think?
Yeah, I think we all have a part to play in that. We believe that we provide best endeavours when we ask to do that. If you just consider the, just basic of invoking SCOPIC, that SCOPIC regime was brought in to avoid something like the Castillo de Belvedere, where you're not going to go and respond anyway because you're not going to get an Article 13 award. So it's a safety net to actually try and respond and protect the environment. But the industry cannot survive on SCOPIC rates. So when you talk about commercial rates, they normally compare them to SCOPIC rates as a basis. If you get someone saying, well, we'll offer you a rec hire for the modified rec hire to do this services on SCOPIC rates without the uplift, you might be able to survive one or two of those, but you certainly won't survive as a company and as an industry. There certainly won't be any reinvestment. So we need the Article 13 award when it's justified and when there's a solved fund. So yeah, I think the trust and the transparency is part of the education process on that, is that your pub that went down, obviously they had a base rate for their beer and the other guys weren't going to pay the uplift. That's the same as the industry, and as you say, it has shrunk. Shipping incidents becoming rarer, but obviously highly valuable with the size of vessels and value of cargoes being shipped. So definitely we need that education, and fortunately what Nick Coleman just said is that actually they're reasonably happy with the arbitration awards in the case of like the Jupiter. They're not unhappy with that. And I think that process and that understanding adds to trust and communication.
Thank you. Our recommendation 5 was to relaunch LOF to demonstrate changes made to address size and transparency of awards. I believe that, David, is it true that, correct me if it's not the case, that Lloyds have targeted the Far East as a particular area of attention vis-à-vis the relaunch of LOF? I guess the question really would be, is that an issue that's geographical or cultural or global?
So I think actually, Lloyds needs to target, and the Lloyds, supported by the Lloyds Salvage Group, the global client base. The Far East Asia was picked out as a specific work stream because I think, forgive me for not being so close to the review, Kevin would have spoke more eloquently about it, but the data would suggest that LOF is used on fewer occasions in that particular region, hence the trying to, and that region is becoming more and more significant in the maritime sector with the insuring of hull and cargo as well as the building of ships as well. So it's a deliberate target, but I think we do need to go global when it comes to speaking more openly about what the other work streams bring forward as well, and whether it's a relaunch or just a further understanding.
Thank you. I mean, recommendation 6 is to improve the active dialogue with Maritime Authorities during the active casualty response. I think your respondents there, Hugh, have perhaps answered that already, but and I think perhaps the industry welcomes even greater input rather than dialogue with the Maritime rather than less.
Well, I was going to say, rather than me coming, I'm looking at a man in the front row here, that maybe a better place to come in with a comment on that, if you don't mind, Peter.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Stefan Hennig, the Secretary of State's representative, so I am Hugh's successor. I think I can't think of a single incident, having worked in casualty response for the last 10 years, where early contact between the parties has damaged anything in the process. I think it's the only way you can really work, and the sooner you do it and the sooner the parties actually communicate with each other, well, you limit your exposure at the end of the day, and from the state perspective, things get resolved a lot quicker. which is obviously in everyone's interest. So as part of the sort of engagement and outreach, I think that needs to really now be focused, and whichever way you want to set that up. I mean, a colleague from IUMI already said, you know, you do education. So that would sit, I think, quite well, and I'd be quite happy to support that, obviously, from a state perspective, so speaking from first-hand experience, to say, if you get the education piece right, then you dispel so many things, these myths about things in the past that are, at the moment, I think we're dealing with so much perception rather than actual fact-based evidential experience, that we need to just readjust people's focus on, no, this is, you're not basing this on facts. You're basing this on long-handed down experiences from people that have worked in industry and probably can't even remember where they got it from. So I'll stop wittering. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, the international group have already got the outreach memorandum of understanding to promote and streamline cooperation between clubs and maritime authorities to facilitate and expedite response. Nick Coleman, is there any lobbying that IUMI may consider to undertake to try to perform some form of property damage replication to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any, there aren't any ongoing discussions or initiatives in that direction, but I don't...
Can you start them, please?
I don't, yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I don't see it as an impossibility. I think we could probably, I mean, we may even be able to work alongside the IG, you know, to be honest, in our approach to maritime authorities. Yeah, I think that would have clear benefits and would be, you know, it's something of a low-hung fruit, to be honest. So, yeah, I would endorse that, and yeah, I think it's something we can work with.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, but
Something
we've
like
only
a
got
Laurel
a
and
few more.
Hardy.
Sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
And maybe I could just add to that. I mean, obviously, it's been very, we're very grateful to Stefan in particular as acting as an advocate for us with various maritime authorities around the world. But we have a large number of countries, particularly those with long coastlines, who are really interested in having engagement with the people with the insurers. So I think to the extent that there is cooperation with the hull side, there's no difficulty from our side in terms of collaboration there, and trying to join up as much as possible, because we are into that, and in terms of trying to get as many people communicating as possible, because there's no doubt that early communication, as Stefan has said, will save cost, it'll save time, proper communication channels, and it builds the trust, which is vital in any marine incident. Thank you.
Thank you. On recommendation 7, I think we can, nothing to add really. Maritime authorities not already participating are encouraged to, and I don't think there's anyone in the room who would disagree with that. Recommendation 8, and that's IUMI replicating the IG ship database. I think you've touched upon that, Nick Coleman. Is there anything that you perhaps might wish to add? Any initiatives there? It's perhaps a bit challenging, but...
Yeah, again, there's nothing yet, but I mean, is it insurmountable? I don't think so. I mean, we won't get to a stage where we have 100% of vessels probably on such a database, but I think we can get quite a long way there. Yeah, it's something that we will have to discuss. It'll have to be taken quite high up in IUMI, I think, to be honest, to get traction from the various member organisations and insurers, but and it'll take time. That's no quick fix, but I think definitely if we can keep the focus up, perhaps we'll get there in a few years. I mean, there are issues of confidentiality and all that sort of thing, but I mean, to be honest, you know, it's there. The P&I clubs are out there. I don't see any big difference in the world knowing what hull insurers lead, you know, compared to what your P&I club is. In my world, that should be open and transparent. Others may see differently, but yeah, it's something to work on.
Thank you. Recommendation 9, only 2 more to go. Recommendation 9 was that an education committee to be formed. Well, I think from every one of the panellists here, I think that there's the will that be done with cross-industry representatives, I think it seems that there's a desire to do it. It's for the common good. Who's going to pay? Yeah, I thought that might be the answer. TBC. And finally, recommendation 10 was to establish a working group to develop a code of practice between all parties, IG, IUMI, ISU and ICS. Nick Sloan, I seem to recall many years ago when I was invited to speak at the ISU, you were working on a code of practice then. I don't know how far you got into that and whether it's...
Yeah, so we have a code of practice with the IG, and it's actually part of the review process that's going on now. So we're reviewing the BIMCO rec stage contracts, and as part of that, there's a code of practice for wreck removal tendering, and a similar code of practice for emergency response, LOF. Maybe we need to engage more with IUMI on that as well.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, obviously codes of practice involving a lot of different parties can be difficult to be anything other than a kind of halfway compromise. Yeah, it'll take some effort again. A lot of these initiatives will take a lot of effort and time. Yeah, and I am just coming back to just a point I want to make regarding, I mean, collaboration in the wider sphere of things is good. I mean, information exchange, transparency, all positive and necessary as the industry moves forward. But in a specific salvage case, you can't do salvage by committee. That does not work. I mean, if we get to the point where you know, X number of parties have to be involved and want to be involved in the decision as to what contract to involve in a salvage matter, then that will inevitably lead to more delays. You know, you need a strong single or at least a very limited pool of decision makers involved in deciding who to contract with and what to contract on. I just want to make that point. You know, you need strong parties, a limited number of them in taking the decisions and moving the case forward. If you involve too many, I think we'll go backwards.
Yeah, we endorse that.
Mm.
Right, well, thank you. It's been highly illuminating. Hugh Shaw's report. Interesting point there in the questionnaire results. The question was, there is always a viable alternative to Lloyds Open Forum. Only 17% of respondents strongly agreed, which means that 83% believe that LOF could, should, may be the preferred contract. If there is consensus that LOF is best, where timely intervention is required, the LOF should always be considered and that it has a place. But how can we ensure greater use? Maybe we need to look at changes to LOF, giving the greater financial certainty that's desired. We've got to address side letters. We may need changes in the LOF contract to achieve this. We may need to morph the LOF to replicate the Open 90 vessel response plans, possibly, and maybe a hybrid between contractual service and LOF. These are all my own personal thoughts, by the way, so don't reflect any of the panel. Maybe we need an LOF light for less urgent cases. But we've got to find a way to incentivise salvors to invest, because the gap between what owners need and what salvors can provide is widening. And those are the words of Bob Understock from Resolve in IUMI 2012, who at that time stated that support systems may be inadequate. So we need lobbying, I think, of IMO to include salvageability into shipbuilding. We've all drive cars, and in our cars, we've all got airbags. We all hope we'll never use those airbags, and most of us won't. But when we do need them, then they're a godsend. Why are we not building salvageability into vessels at the time of construction, to perhaps build a platform on a container ship that will enable equipment to be ported in and constructed there? It's an industry response, and I think it's a collective responsibility of us all to hopefully try to achieve that. So what next? Will this insightful report collect dust? or will it be the catalyst for change? And I understand from David there are 3 working parties. They're looking at various issues there. As an industry, if we don't deal with the delay problems, we're likely to face the wrath of social media when, not if, such a situation arises. We've probably only got one shot at this, and if this report is consigned to shelving to collect dust, then we're really looking down the barrel as to the future viability of Lloyds Open Forum. I'd like to thank the panel. It's been incredibly insightful and very valuable contributions. But LOF, LSAB, do we use it or lose it? By the way, as a postscript, my local pub reopens in 2 weeks. Thank you.
We're running slightly over time, but given the eminence of the audience here, I wonder whether there are any burning questions or comments that people would like to make. Stefan's already spoken. Anyone else? We do have a roving microphone, so if you do have a comment, please identify yourself and then with your question, wait for the microphone to arrive. Any? Melis? Sorry, it's coming.
Apologies just before lunch. First of all, thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
So you could just identify yourself.
Sorry,
so just
because
in case for those online.
So, Melis Otmar, I'm a claims broker, and also I'm the current chairperson of LIBA Marine Claims Subcommittee. And I will hopefully also be part of the work stream for awards and costs, which was supposed to take place last week, but unfortunately couldn't due to Kevin's illness, COVID. Nevertheless, yes, there are myths. And I have seen this during my broking life, whereby a hull underwriter strictly instructed me to tell the ship owner not to sign an LOF without even asking the question what the cargo is on board. And the only way, or one of the major ways to overcome this myth, or the surrounding myths of LOF, are education and transparency, which we all agree. Regarding education, obviously your initiative is working. We have a full house, albeit lack of hull presence physically, on a Monday. So congratulations. And hopefully we'll see the fruits and benefits. But for the transparency, in my humble opinion, I do think that LOF hasn't been able to adapt to the change technology has brought. During the process of signing an LOF, the technology is there because everyone seems to know what's going on. I immediately get notified. I immediately notify my hull underwriter, and there seems to be an immediate communication chain, whether it's for the benefit or not. That's another point. But afterwards, we do not have this technological advancement in place to know what's exactly going on. Lloyds doesn't seem to have enough data to be able to give us the analytics. And as you have pointed out, we can't know what has been settled in terms of figures outside of the arbitration. And I think the excellent pub analogy will become a foreshadowing if we do not manage to have the data in place. I don't know how, but I would like to make this statement because I'm a strong believer in the power of data in our current environment, and without knowing what's being settled out of the arbitration, then we won't break these myths surrounding LOF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone wish to comment on that on the panel quickly or not?
Well, other than that, I wholly agree, no.
Right, good, okay. Any other questions or comments? Andreas?
Good afternoon. My name is Andreas Bispas. I work for a shipping company, and I also chair the insurance committee of the International Chamber of Shipping. Captain Nick, you mentioned a vessel that ultimately ended up as a total loss, and the master couldn't get a response from principals. Should he have taken the initiative and signed LOF and risked the sack? And had he done so, could the owner then have rescinded him having signed LOF?
Yeah, so that's the Econ Thunder. The master eventually sent out a mayday. LOF was awarded and the master was sacked.
Thank you. Anyone else? Over here.
Hello, I'm Pennywood Hill from AXA XL. So I'm a hull underwriter. Just wanted to mention a couple of things. The Joint Marine Claims Committee do speak with the IG group, and we have been liaising quite a bit with them to try and encourage and foster an agreement which we do have in place with them, so that we do actually liaise and discuss casualties as and when they're happening. So I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that we are doing it, I promise, and we are trying to make that happen. There are issues with the IG group when it's a large loss, and we have to be very aware and careful about what information needs to stay private and confidential, and so that is one of the issues that we do have to be mindful of. There is also going to be a list as well of put together of hull and machinery respondents, which is being made available so that that will actually be on the database for the IUA, so that you can actually get the information available to know who is and is not available to discuss matters when it comes to this type of issue. So hopefully a bit of progress is being made.
Good. Okay, I think we're probably out of time now. I'm going to ask Ben Harris, who is chair of the International Group Salvage Committee, just to close the session. So Ben, over to you. Just come on.
Thank you, Nick. Just about small enough to squeeze through that gap. Closing remarks, thank you for the introduction. I wanted to say that, as has been seen here today, there are a number of challenges with Lloyds Open Form. I was part of the project team alongside Steve Roberts and Andreas O'Gray from the international group, and we spent a lot of time working with Hugh on this, and I think we always, when we were discussing, wanted to go back to basics quite often as of why are we doing this. From the discussion today, it's not easy to solve all of the challenges of delay and the declining use of LOF if you link those two things together. But what we wanted to do was make sure that we at least focus on the delay aspect. We might not solve things overnight, but if we can at least get the message out there that there is delay, and that delay is increasing, and it's leading to near misses and actual losses, then all of the people here in the room and those that are joining online, we hope that everyone in their constituent part could go back and actually communicate that message about delay so that it does actually feed through. And that may be the embryo that starts the education and training that we all recognise is required. And if we can overlay on top of that some of the concerns people have about the financial side and the awards and the costs, those things are not easy, and we've been talking about them for some time, but we do need to take action. And if that action comes in the form of greater collaboration between the whole markets and the P&I and everyone involved, that's excellent. And so, as I said, hopefully this is a catalyst for that progress. But for now and for tomorrow, we shouldn't forget about delay in those urgent cases where there's only one right decision. That decision needs to be made, and that those messages need to be passed down. And then I was only going to conclude by saying thank you, my personal thanks to all of the panel for today. And I also wanted to thank the international group, Nick Shaw, Danielle Datta and Sophia Batali from the international group, and again to the working group, which is Steve Roberts and Andreas O'Gray. Thank you.